When Chronomancer first launched with Heart of Thorns 8 years ago, it was the best and only quickness and alacrity provider in the game. And today, we're taking a trip back to a simpler time.
You've got to come back with me!
After 8 years of balance patches, expansions, pandemics, and economic collapse, ArenaNet has gifted us something special. So today, we're covering what is unquestionably the most flexible build in Guild Wars 2, the Boon sharing Chronomancer. Welcome back everyone. Over the past few months, Chronomancer has been my go-to support class whenever I jump into endgame PVE. No matter which raid I do or which strike I'm commanding, I can change up my build to cover whatever the group needs. With a single trait change, we can go from providing quickness to covering alacrity to even pumping on an exceptional DPS build. No need whatsoever to change your gear. Not only that, you basically have complete freedom to bring whatever utility skills you need to hard carry your team to victory. Mesmer in general is known for having access to some of the best utility skills in the game, with Portal for team-wide mobility, Feedback for outstanding reflex, and mass invisibility for squad-wide stealth. Plus, with Chronomancer's access to continuum split, you can squeeze double the use out of each of your skills whenever you need. Guild Wars 2 has one of the best combat systems I've ever seen, and Chronomancer just lets you experience even more of that. To put it simply, Chrono takes the best that Guild Wars 2 has to offer and gives you even more of it. That's enough of my gushing, it's time to jump in. When you become a Chronomancer, you get access to Shield as an offhand weapon, which has an amazing block and the absolutely loaded Tides of Time skill. We won't be using it on this build, but we will on the new and improved Heal Chrono build, but that's for another video my friends. You also get access to Well skills for some powerful AoE effects. Your Shatter skills have also changed. Mind Rack becomes split second, so now when you shatter, your clones explode twice instead of once. Rewinder replaces Cry of Frustration. You still inflict confusion and damage foes, but now the recharge of the shatter is reduced by 3 seconds for each clone that you use. Time Sync replaces Diversion, so you now inflict a shorter duration days compared to Diversion, but you now also apply slow to enemies as well. Most importantly, you now get access to Continuum Split, which is the single most unique skill in Guild Wars 2. And if I were to describe it simply to someone I met on the street, it would basically be you activate it to save your current health, position, and current cooldowns. While it's active, you can use whatever skills you want. It will last longer the more clones that you shatter, and when it runs out, you're reset to your starting position with your health and cooldowns intact. You're then free to cast your skills again straight away. It basically lets you travel back in time and use your skills twice. There's countless ways to use this skill, and each one is more incredible than the last. And now we'll touch on our gear and food. For our gear, we're using a mix of Berserkers and Assassin's gear to hit 100% critical chance. I've included the exact combination of gear that I use on the screen, and I'll also include a link to the build in the description below so you can check back on it later. Hitting 100% critical chance when you're fully buffed with Fury is incredibly important to power DPS classes. Every time you don't crit, you're missing out on a huge amount of damage due to your critical hits being powered up by your ferocity. Chronomancer is a class that needs a lot of help to reach crit cap, so we'll be using more pieces of Assassin's gear than you're used to. There are lots of different combinations of gear, runes, sigils, and food that will get you there. This one I recommend because you can use the standard power and ferocity food that all other power classes use, so you don't need to buy a separate food. We'll be taking Rune of Infiltration for the extra power and precision you need to crit cap. As is the case for a lot of power builds, we'll be taking Sigil of Force and Impact for the flat damage increase you get to strike damage. If you are struggling to keep up boons, you can swap out Sigil of Impact for Sigil of Concentration. This will give you an extra 10% boon duration at the cost of some damage. As a boon support build, the most important thing you can do is make sure that your team has 100% quickness or alacrity uptime, whichever is the one you're providing. So Sigil of Concentration can give you a nice cushion if you need it. We'll be taking Relic of the Thief for a simple 5% damage modifier, and for our consumables, we'll be taking Sous Vide Steaks and Superior Sharpening Stones, or any power and ferocity food that fits your budget. For our weapons, we'll be taking Dagger, Sword, and Greatsword. If you need to group mobs together, you can run offhand focus instead of Sword. However, Sword is going to be your highest DPS option. The best thing about Chronomancer weapons after Secrets of the Obscura is launched is that we can also equip Dagger instead of main hand sword like we used to. This means that each of your weapon sets is fully ranged and Dagger is far easier to use compared to sword. Being able to attack from range sets this build apart from the incredible Power Quickness Herald and means you will likely be able to achieve higher damage on boss encounters where you can't always be in melee range. For our Dagger skills, Flying Cutter will launch a blade at your target, and if you hit them 3 times within a few seconds, you'll cause a flurry of blades to hit them. This attack pierces and works from 1200 range, which is incredible. Blade Call will throw a cone of 3 daggers in front of you, which will then return to you and strike your target again. If you hit an enemy with this attack, you'll generate a clone. Even though this skill has 1200 range, you want to be somewhat close to your target to make sure that all 3 blades land, due to it being thrown out in a cone shape. Unstable Blade Storm will create a storm of daggers that will attack nearby enemies every second. Just some nice AoE damage overall. On sword, Illusionary Riposte will let you block and create a clone if you're attacked. You can also activate it again to fire Counterblade, which will fire a bolt to daze your target. Phantasmal Swordsman will strike your target and summon a Sword Phantasm. If the first strike hits, you'll gain 8 stacks of might. The Phantasm here actually does a few things. It will first leap towards your target, which creates a leap finisher for itself. Then it will attack 8 times with Blurred Frenzy, the Mesmer Sword 2 skill. This skill is important because it provides you with a ton of Fencer's Finesse stacks due to one of our traits, which just translates to extra ferocity. If you choose to equip Focus, Temporal Curtain will summon a wall of energy that will give swiftness to your allies and cripple enemies. You can then activate it again to pull nearby enemies together. This is the main reason you're going to want to take Focus, so you can pull groups of enemies together for you and your team to burst down. Phantasmal Water will summon a phantasm that attacks nearby foes 12 times and blocks projectiles as long as you stand in it. On Greatsword, Spatial Surge will fire a beam of energy at your foe, which will deal more damage the further away they are. Mirror Blade will make you throw a blade towards your target and generate a clone. The blade then bounces between enemies and allies, which will either damage foes or grant might to your allies. It also inflicts some vulnerability for good measure. Mind Stab is just a simple, meaty spike of AoE damage that you can aim freely, which also cripples foes. Phantasmal Berserker will make you throw your Greatsword at targets, deal damage, remove boons, then summon a Greatsword Phantasm to attack multiple times. This is one of your highest damaging skills, and the Phantasm will typically want to refresh with Signet of the Aether. Illusionary Wave will simply knock back foes in front of you and deal a small hit of damage. Due to your trait Vicious Expression, it will also remove boons from enemies you hit, which is a very nice feature of any Power Mesmer build. One of the best things about Chronomancer is that you can typically swap out any of your skills to suit what you and your team need. Except your heal skill, but we'll get into that in a moment. So many other builds have 1 to 2 skills that are set in stone, and you can never change without seriously hindering your build. Chrono doesn't have this problem. We'll start with your default loadout, and then you can tweak it from there. First up, we have Signet of the Aether. The passive effect of this is that you'll heal your skill whenever you summon an illusion. And when you activate it, you'll heal yourself and instantly recharge all of your Phantasm skills. Never change this skill. It's needed to recharge your Phantasms and make your rotation work properly. So if you ever think about changing it, just reflect on your words and deeds, what got you to this point, and then leave it alone. You can either run Phantasmal Disenchanter or Mantra of Pain, depending on your preference. Mantra of Pain is just here for a nice burst of damage and will give you the highest overall DPS. You'll just be using a single charge of it, wait for it to restock to 2 charges, and then using one whenever it's available. This is the first skill that you can swap out when you need a bit of extra utility. Phantasmal Disenchanter is my personal preference. Being a Phantasm, it also gives you an extra source of your key boon, either Quickness or Alacrity. It also generates additional clones that can make your opening burst with Continuum Split far easier to execute, which we will touch on later in this video. On top of some decent damage, it also removes boons from your target, so some nice extra utility baked into your build for free. This is my personal recommendation, as I find it makes the rotation far easier to pull off. For the rest of this guide, I'll be assuming that you've equipped Phantasmal Disenchanter, particularly for the rotation section, but you can replace it with Mantra of Pain with no issues if you prefer though. Just a matter of personal preference. Well of Calamity will do some big pulsing AoE damage and also apply Cripple and Weakness, which reduces the damage that enemies do. Well of Action, again, is some pulsing AoE damage. It will apply slow to enemies and super speed to your allies when it expires. It also grants Might and Fury to crank your team's damage. Gravity Well does even more pulsing damage. Each pulse applies a different type of CC. First you'll knock down, float, and then pull enemies towards the center and deal tons of break bar damage. You can use this skill for damage off cooldown, but you can also save it for break bars if you need. If you want to swap out your skills, swap them out in this order. Mantra of Pain and Phantasmal Disenchanter first, Well of Calamity, and then finally Well of Action. Mesmer has tons of great skills, so we're spoiled for choice here. Portal is obviously great to portal your team around as needed. There's so many different uses for this skill, so use your imagination. Mantra of Concentration is great for providing extra stability and aegis to your team. Feedback is your go-to skill if you ever need to reflect projectiles, incredibly important on raid fights like Matthias. Mantra of Distraction will give you extra break bar damage against single targets. Well of Senility will give you extra break bar damage for multiple enemies as well as some extra damage. Mimic is a fantastic skill. Once you cast it, you can then use your next utility skill twice before it goes on cooldown. Use this if there's a utility skill you really want to get another use out of. Portal is a super common use for this. Signet of Humility, or Moa Signet as it's commonly referred to, is great for truly insane levels of break bar damage on single targets. Mass Invisibility is incredibly useful to provide your entire squad stealth. Notice that this has a target cap of 10 people instead of 5 like most skills do. Time Warp is nice for a little bit of extra quickness. It's great if you're running the Alacrity version of this build and you need to pad out your team's quickness a bit. For our trait lines, we'll be taking Domination, Dueling, and Chronomancer. Domination is here for a lot of extra damage modifiers, the single most important thing for a DPS build, and gives you an insane amount of boon removal baked into your build for free. Bountiful Blades will cause your Greatsword 2 skill to bounce additional times and your Greatsword 4 skill to summon another phantasm to attack your target. This trait makes Greatsword 4 the single most important skill in your damage rotation, and the skill will be resetting with Signet of the Ether. Egotism will simply cause you to deal increased strike damage to foes at a lower health percentage than you. Damage modifiers on a DPS build are always a good thing. Vicious Expression will cause you and your illusions to deal more damage to enemies without boons. It also makes it so that whenever you CC an enemy, you'll remove boons from them. This trait gives Power Chronomancer, or any Mesmer build that takes it, truly insane levels of boon removal, which I might add is fantastic for things like Harvest Temple Challenge Mode, which we are working our way through at the moment. Dueling is all about improving your critical hits and granting fury to yourself and your team. Phantasmal Fury will simply grant fury to your phantasms so that they deal more damage. Fence's Finesse will grant you stacks of Fence's Finesse, which grants you additional ferocity whenever you or one of your illusions attack with a sword or spear skill. Your Sword Phantasm will be solely responsible for this buff, so feel free to swap out this trait when you're not running sword offhand. Master Fencer will grant 50% Fury uptime to you and your team, so a nice little bonus. Superiority Complex will make your critical hits do 15% extra damage, and given that we'll be critting 100% of the time, this is just a flat 15% extra damage across the board. You'll also deal an additional 10% strike damage to targets that are affected by CC. One thing to note is that when you're practicing this build on the Golem, make sure to not apply either Fear or Taunt to it. This will inflate your damage numbers to the point of them not being realistic. So if you really want to know how you compare to benchmark numbers out there, make sure to not apply these conditions. Chronomancer is all about letting you either provide quickness or alacrity to your team. With a single trait change at the end, we can either swap from a quickness to an alacrity or even a full DPS build. Time Catches Up will give your illusions super speed when you shatter so that they run to the target faster. That also make your shatters deal extra damage to movement impaired foes. This is a very consistent damage increase. Flow of Time will grant you alacrity for each clone you shatter, and when paired with the trait Stretch Time, will also apply it to allies. This means that even when you're not running Stretch Time and not the main alacrity provider for your team, you can still buff yourself with a bit of alacrity, which is very nice. Improved alacrity will make alacrity even more effective for you personally. you get an even bigger cooldown reduction, with the trade-off being that it has a shorter duration on you. This is somewhat counteracted by the trait Flow of Time, which will give you your own personal Alacrity supply. You'll also do an additional 10% critical damage whenever you have Alacrity. Now we get onto our Grandmaster traits in Chronomancer. Your choice here determines whether you're going to provide Quickness, Alacrity, or become a full-on DPS build. No other changes required. Stretch Time will cause your trait Flow of Time to affect nearby allies as well as yourself. You'll also grant Alacrity to nearby allies whenever you summon a Phantasm. With this trait, you don't need any extra boon duration to keep up 100% Alacrity, a huge selling point of this build. Seize the Moment works very similar to Stretch Time. You'll now provide Quickness to allies whenever you shatter or summon a Phantasm. This is basically the Quickness version of the combination of Stretch Time and Flow of Time. Same deal as before, you don't need any extra boon duration to upkeep 100% Quickness. Chrono Phantasma will turn this build from a boon support build straight to a power DPS build. Again, no gear changes required. Chrono Phantasma makes it so that after your Phantasms are done attacking and would turn themselves into a clone, they instead resummon themselves and attack again. You will not find this level of flexibility anywhere else in the game, so bask in its glory, my friends. The rotation for Boon Chrono looks much more complicated than it is. If you look at the skills listed out, it can seem a bit overwhelming. However, at its core, the rotation is basically a set loop on Dagger, a set loop on Greatsword, then a fancy opening burst with Continuum Split where you cram in as many skills as possible. The good news is, you don't actually need to use Continuum Split to help keep up your boons. It just gives you a nice extra cushion of boons and a higher opening burst. So while you're learning the build, feel free just to slap the Dagger and Greatsword loops together and start incorporating Continuum Split as you get more comfortable. First up for our Dagger Loop. We'll start by using Sword 5, Dagger 2, Dagger 3, we'll then auto attack, Dagger 2, auto attack, Dagger 2 again, Sword 5, and Sword 3. We'll then weapon swap and go through our Greatsword Loop. Here we'll start on Greatsword 4, Greatsword 2, Greatsword 3, we'll then auto attack, Greatsword 2, auto attack again, Greatsword 3, Greatsword 4, Signet of the Ether to recharge your Phantasms, Greatsword 4, Greatsword 2, and then weapon swap. Alongside the Dagger and Greatsword Loop, make sure to use your utility skills. If you're using Mantra of Pain, use a single charge when you have 2 charges available. Having to fully recharge it if you use up all the charges is really painful. Use Phantasmal Disenchanter, Well of Calamity, Action, and Gravity Well off cooldown. Use your F1 Shatter, Split Second, whenever you have 3 clones available. Use your F2 Shatter, Rewinder, whenever you have clones to spare. Make sure that you use your F4 Shatter Distortion whenever you're in danger and just about to soil yourself. Save your F3 Shatter Time Sync whenever break bars pop up. So for a simplified opener, just start on Dagger and use Phantasmal Disenchanter if you're using it, Sword 5, Dagger 2, Dagger 3. Swap to Greatsword and perform your Greatsword Loop, then swap back to Dagger and pick up your Dagger Loop. Use your shatters as needed and use your utility skills whenever you're auto attacking on Dagger or Greatsword. Now, if you want to take your chrono gaming to the next level, you can start including Continuum Split into your opener. Here, after using Phantasmal Disenchanter and your 3 skills on Dagger Sword, you'll use Greatsword 2 for the extra clone. You'll then use Greatsword 4 and use Continuum Split during the cast. You cast Continuum Split during the Greatsword 4 cast, so that it will be off cooldown and available when Continuum Split ends. Also, you can squeeze all these skills in when you use Continuum Split with 2 clones. But I find you'll have more leeway with 3, so that's why I recommend running Phantasmal Disenchanter for the extra clones. You'll then use both Well of Calamity and Well of Action. Pop Signet of the Ether. Greatsword 4 again, Greatsword 2, Greatsword 3, Phantasmal Disenchanter if you're using it, use Gravity Well, exit Continuum Split. If you're fast, you can manually exit, else you'll just get forced out. Use Greatsword 4 again, Well of Calamity, Well of Action, Signet of the Ether, Greatsword 4, Greatsword 2, Greatsword 3, weapon swap. You'll then go through your Dagger Loop. Also, circling back a bit, use as many of your normal shatters as possible while in Continuum Split. It's just free boons and damage as they're instant cast. There's a lot to practice here, so just take your time. Use as many skills as you can and try and squeeze in more and more each time. The very fact that you're watching this video means that you're a discerning and wise Guild Wars 2 player, so I have complete faith in you. You've got this. In terms of when to use Continuum Split again, there aren't any hard and fast rules. Ideally, depending on the fight, you'll use it when you start up a new boss phase and all your skills are off cooldown. However, this won't always be the case. Sometimes you'll just use it when it pops up and squeeze in as many skills as possible. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. And now, my friends, you have everything you need to completely master Chronomancer. With a single build, you can choose to cover either Quickness, Alacrity, or pump out DPS for your team. The fact that you decided to play this build means you can basically walk into any squad and know that there's a spot for you. If there was one build I'd recommend you pick up to make your life in and outside of Guild Wars 2 easier, it would be this one. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see what you're competing against as a Boon Chronomancer, make sure you check out my guide on Quickness Herald, one of the premier boon supports in the game right now. Let me know down in the comments below what other builds you'd like me to cover, and with that, I'll catch you all next time. Cheers.